The Week in Bible Prophecy, a Prophecy Watchers podcast.
Welcome to the podcast today, everyone. I am sitting here at our podcast table with Alex Newman. Welcome, Alex.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
This is going to be a great conversation. We are going to be discussing central bank digital currency as well as the world climate religion. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody about our upcoming conference in Colorado Springs, which is June 27th through the 30th. Alex will be there, bringing some messages for us. Again, things are happening so fast right now that it's great to have conferences, it's great to fellowship, but it's also good to stay informed as the enemy and the globalists and all of what he's after. They're not sleeping at night. They are moving forward with their agendas. So prophecywatchers.com, if you'd love to join us, it would be great to have you in Colorado Springs, as well as joining us through live stream. And that's going to be coming out very soon. And so if you can't join us in live stream. And also put on your calendar that coming to Branson, Missouri in December, December 6th through 8th. We're going to be having a conference there at the beautiful Chateau on the Lake. And it's a great time together to have it fully decorated, and we're hoping Alex can make it if his schedule allows as well. And so, Alex, welcome again. But for those that might not know about you and your ministry and your work, kind of share with them where they can find you. This is a podcast format, so it's not always things can't really come up on the screen. But where can they find you?
Easiest place is libertysentinel.org. Sentinel is SENTINEL. So .org. Sentinel, of course, it's a word that's not in common usage anymore, but it's like a watchman, somebody who's guarding a military installation or a group. And libertysentinel.org, I post at least a representative sampling of all my writing, my TV shows, my radio programs, and all the rest of it. So
yeah, you were on the cutting edge, and what I find absolutely fascinating is just learning about how God has raised you, so to speak, and your background of traveling around the world and being raised outside of the United States and learning languages and different things for such a time as this. And, what do you think, we're going to talk about the digital currency and other things, but what would you say are before we get into it, what do you see as the biggest, maybe one or two biggest items that are on the forefront right now as it relates to understanding the times that we're in?
Well, when I look at all the different things that are going on, I think the one that most strikes me as critical for the church to understand is what's happening to our children in the government schools, with the social media, with the entertainment, so-called. Our children are under attack from all sides by Satan, by Satan's minions, by the powers and principalities, the spiritual wickedness in high places that the Apostle Paul talks about. And as parents, we have an obligation to equip them, to prepare them, and to protect them from these assaults. And we have an obligation as well to disciple them, to teach them the ways of the Lord, to teach them about God, about God's laws, about God's instructions, about Jesus Christ and what He did for us. And unfortunately, I think Christians, especially in America, but in many other places, especially what used to be known as Christendom, the Western world, have really fallen short on this. So when I look at all the different things that are happening, all the different things that the enemy is doing, that is one of the ones that I have focused on the most because I believe it's the most significant and the most dangerous. I believe it's a gospel issue. I believe it's a Great Commission issue. Because in Matthew 28, we're told to make disciples of all nations, to baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and to teach them to obey or to observe everything that God has commanded us. And we often, I think of that as like, well, that means we have to support a missionary family in Haiti or the Philippines or Zimbabwe. And yes, those things are all important, but how are we going to make disciples of all nations? How are we going to pretend like we're making disciples of all nations when we're losing in this country about 80 to 90% of our children to the world? I think God is going to hold us as parents accountable. And I think we're going to have to give an account for what we did and whether we followed God's instructions with this incredibly important responsibility, this incredible privilege that He's given to us. So I see that as perhaps the most critical issue. And all the other issues run through it, right? They're brainwashing the children with the climate change propaganda, with the ridiculous notion that the UN is the savior of mankind and is going to bring about peace. So I see that as kind of the issue that transcends all the other issues. I believe it's the most important weapon that the enemy is using to wage war on the church, on the family, on the nation. And we often forget that it was God who divided people into nations. That is how he's preparing the next generation to submit to this one world totalitarian antichrist system. And we as Christians, we as Christian parents must take this seriously.
Yeah, there was a book that was written by Ken Ham not too long ago called Already Gone. And, he just went through the statistics of kids that were raised in church, evangelical churches. I was a pastor for a long time. Because I was the lead pastor, I was able to shape the teaching, and it was conservative. It was I'm teaching the Bible even as a youth pastor. In all those times, I was able to teach the Scripture. It's infallible. It's inerrant. Here's the evidence. My background's in archaeology, so here's the archaeology showing why the Bible's true, all the way down, right? Science and everything else. I enjoyed all that, but even in my own experience, looking back at the ministry, and even of the kids that I taught. To this day, I would say most of them are gone. They're not walking with the Lord. And so I know that for that 2 hours a week that I had them, they were getting God's truth. And so that being the case, let's dwell on this for a little longer because I think it's important. You wrote a book on this recently, just coming out right now on this particular topic. Let's talk about the danger and the true risk between, explain to me, Alex, I taught these kids 2 hours of solid truth every week. And so in one sense, I can stand before the Lord, and Lord, I taught them your truth. I pointed them to the gospel, but yet most of them are gone now. Why? How did I fail? What led to their departure, at least presently? Now we hope that they come back, but at the current moment, what led to their departure?
Well, before we started recording, you and I talked a little bit about this. The Bible, and therefore God, clearly places a responsibility over discipleship on parents primarily. Now, that's not to say there's not a supplemental role for the church. The church should be equipping the saints. The church has very, very significant roles in helping the parents and so on, and teaching, of course, the Word of God. But ultimately, the responsibility for discipling of children is with the parents. You go to Deuteronomy chapter 6 and Deuteronomy chapter 11, God kind of gives you the layout of what a real discipleship program, what a real education actually looks like. And he says you should be teaching your children diligently about God and about his laws when you wake up in the morning, when you go to bed at night, when you're walking by the way, when you're sitting down. At all times, parents should be teaching and training their children. And I say this a lot. Christian education will not save your children per se. Jesus Christ saves our children. But when God has given us very clear instructions for how we are to raise up ultimately his children, right? We're just entrusted
stewards, yeah.
Exactly. They're not our children. They don't belong to us. They belong to God. And if they're God's children, we ought to be, if we claim to be followers of God, we ought to be following his instructions on how we raise up those children. And so, Ken Ham, I love his ministry. He and I both starred in a documentary that was released recently called Mind Polluters. And he hits the nail on the head in terms of the incredible destruction that this worldview that is taught in every public school in this country does to the minds of children. They discredit the first sentences in the Bible very strategically, right? The billions of years, it came from slime that turned into a monkey. There is no God. And for me, that was one of the big obstacles for me taking the Bible seriously, was believing as an article of faith that was unquestionable.
Because you weren't raised Christian.
I was not. Yeah. No, I was raised with this diabolical worldview that we came from slime, that our life has no more meaning than the life of our pet goldfish. And incredibly, incredibly dangerous. And so when you have this worldview being instilled in children 5 days a week, 10 hours a day if you add in homework and everything else, plus then supplemented by the entertainment, supplemented by the social media, what is the church going to do for 1 or 2 hours a week? It's why we have this crisis in worldview. There was a time in America where almost 100% of people saw the world through a biblical lens. Even the non-Christians looked at history through a biblical lens, looked at science through a biblical lens. Today, Barna's research shows that it's just less than 10%. Even most pastors don't have a proper biblical worldview. And the reason why we got to this place is the enemy understood if I can get control of the education and therefore the discipleship, I can turn them away. And these evildoers, Mondo, I've studied them for a long time. I've studied their methods. They have bragged that in 15 minutes, they can undo everything parents tried to instill in their children over 15 years. This was in the context of something called values clarification. So this was first deployed in the United States back in the mid-'60s. I think the first time it was used in an American classroom was 1966. Today it's ubiquitous. The UN says it should be used on every child in every country. And it works like this for the folks who maybe went to school prior to 1966. And I remember when they did it to me. I was in 8th grade. It was devastating. It completely shattered my trust in my parents, in the objective right and wrong. This is how they said. So, Alex, you're on a ship, class, you're on a ship, and your ship is sinking, and you all jump out into a life raft. Well, the life raft has a carrying capacity of 10, but 11 of you jumped into the life raft. And so what are you going to do? Now you got to figure out who you're going to murder. And so they'll give you all the details. You've got a teacher, you've got a nurse. Now it would be like a transgender, biracial engineer. A multi-able, et cetera. You got a lawyer, you got a doctor. So who are you going to murder so that everybody else in your life raft can survive? And I think, of course, the obvious answer would be the lawyer. What do we need? Totally kidding. So if the kids were thinking about this, they would say, wait a minute. Dad said don't murder. Mom said don't murder. Pastor said don't murder. The Bible said don't murder. So let's figure out another solution. Hey, how about I'll volunteer to swim alongside the raft for the first hour? And when I get too tired, then we'll rotate, and then we won't sink the raft. But that's not what happens, right? What happens in the minds of these children is, this is a situation where the only good thing to do is to go against what I've been taught is wrong. So we have to kill somebody. What stupid parents I have. What a goofy pastor I have. I can't believe they never thought of a situation like this where the moral thing to do was actually to murder somebody. What do they know? And so in an instant, this shatters the child's worldview. It shatters the child. And this is what the UN says. This is a good way to make children move beyond traditional notions of right and wrong. It shatters their trust in their pastor, in their Bible, in their parents, and it leads them to believe falsely that there is no objective right, that there is no objective wrong, and that morality and ethics depends on the situation, that they're relative. So this is absolutely devastating to a child, and it's being used on virtually every child in virtually every public school in the world right now. So this is how sophisticated they are. They've perfected these methods over 100 years. They're very, very good at what they do. And again, Jesus Christ can still save a lot of these children who are being brainwashed. He saved me. Yeah. But the reality is parents have an obligation to take this seriously and to follow God's instructions.
And give us a 90-second explanation of what you cover in your brand new book.
So we go through the history of the government school system. A lot of people don't realize this is a new innovation, right? For almost 2,000 years of church history, it wouldn't have occurred to parents to trust their children to the government. We go through what's happening right now, the dumbing down, the indoctrination, the sexualization. We show where this is going, right? They're preparing your children right now for a satanic, one-world religious, political, and economic system. And you can prove this. We've got the documents to prove it. And then we look at, what does the Bible say about education? What did education look like in this country and throughout the Christian world before the government took it over? And so I've studied enough about education that I could write an encyclopedia on it, but I wanted to distill what I felt were the most critical things for people to know in an easy-to-read, easy-to-digest book. So this is basically 15 years of research, study, investigation on the subject condensed into something that's easy for somebody to read.
What I've saw in my pastoral experience was, most parents giving they're given a tacit acknowledgement to, there's some negatives in the public school, but our public school is pretty, it's okay. I mean, but look, they're government schools, and all day long they come from a secular perspective, and I see some parents. And some parents become very defensive of their choice to allow their kids to be in the government schools, and because their school isn't that bad. And look, this isn't a salvation issue. I'm not here to condemn anybody. That's not my role. But I think when I hear that from certain parents as a pastor, that they were minimizing the true foundations of the government schools. And I use that word very intentionally. These are government schools. They are completely secular, and it's been far worse. So can a Christian, and I'm putting you on the spot here, can a Christian truly defend the idea of releasing their child 7 hours a day over to government schools?
I believe the answer is simple. The answer is no. And if you look at the other side, they understood this, right? John Dewey, who's almost universally acknowledged as the kind of founding father of America's public school system. This was a guy who was a communist. This is a guy who loved the Soviet system. This is a guy who thought he was founding a new religion in the form of humanism, which is really just the oldest lie in the book. The idea that you're a god, I'm a god, there is no real God, so we can decide for ourselves what's right and wrong. Did God really say? So it's just a religion from the pit of hell. But your children are being taught a false religion. And several critical people have actually admitted this in public. So John Dewey and about 30 of his friends wrote the Humanist Manifesto. This was basically their religion defined. And if you read it, it's very, very similar in many ways to the Communist Manifesto. Get rid of the profit motive, reorganize the economy, equitable distribution of the means of life. But he also says right in the beginning, we believe the universe is self-existing and not created. Right? So God is a liar. Genesis 1 is a fraud. There is no real God. And you cannot expect that people who believe in this religion are going to have your children for 5 days a week, for 8 hours a day, and not try to instill it. In fact, they were very open about the fact that they wanted to instill this. And one of the signers of this manifesto, his name was C.F. Potter. He wrote a book called Humanism, A New Religion. And he laughs in this book. He says, what is your Sunday school going to do for 1 hour a week against our 5 days of humanistic teachings in the public schools? He says the public schools are going to be schools of humanism. What is your Sunday school going to do? And he knew the answer. It was a rhetorical question. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And the Supreme Court justice who wrote the dissent, so a lot of people probably still remember 1962, 1963, they kicked the first prayer and then the Bible out of schools. The justice who wrote the dissent, Justice Potter Stewart, he actually hit the nail on the head when he explained what was happening here. He said, with these rulings, we are not creating neutrality with respect to religion. He said, what we've done is establish, was the term he used, the religion of secularism, or what John Dewey would have recognized as the religion of humanism. So we need to understand when Jesus told us in Matthew and in Luke that you're either with me or against me, he meant that literally. Christians, I think many of us have been deceived into believing that there's this neutral ground and that the schools are neutral. They're not instilling a particular theological, eschatological, epistemological worldview in the children. That's false. They are, and it's not with Christ. Therefore, that leaves us one option. It's against Christ. And for parents who've been told to bring up their children in the fear, the discipline, the admonition, the instruction of the Lord, how can you say you're doing that when you're handing over your children for the vast majority of their waking hours to a government school? And I like that you use the word government. They are government schools. And it's not just any government. This is a government that slaughters millions of children with tax money. Right? This is clearly not a government we want to entrust our children to. How can you pretend like you're following God's instructions when you're handing your children over to such a system? So like you, I don't want to condemn anybody. This isn't coming from a place of judgment. This is coming from a place of, look, God has revealed certain things to us about how we are to raise his children. If we claim to be his followers, his disciples, why are we not following him on this unbelievably important area? So I would urge parents to really be in prayer about this. Grandparents, be in prayer about your grandchildren, and go to the scriptures. God has so much wisdom, so much knowledge, so much insight for us on how we do this right.
So let's bring it down to the rubber in the road here for a lot of people. And again, as you're saying, this isn't a spirit of judgmentalism. It's a warning in that. Again, in my own, 25 years of ministry now, seeing students, not walking with the Lord anymore. And that really is the goal. I think all of us want that. So let's speak to the parent who has children in the schools, and for whatever reason, life, just the current situation, life is there where they have to have them in the public school, and they're Christian, and let's give a starting scenario. I mean, the ultimate thing would be pull them out, homeschool them. Well, okay, I can't do that. Well, pull them out, send them to Christian school. Well, I currently can't do that. So let's make the best of the moment. Okay, what do you recommend? What advice, counsel would you give to parents who have to do it that way in the sense in the current moment? They're praying about it, but they're going to be there on Monday. What do you recommend?
Well, I would start by going back to the analogy that I use constantly, and that is the burning building. It's quite an inadequate analogy, but if your children were in a burning building, you wouldn't pray about it. You wouldn't figure out, hey, what am I going to do with my child once I get him out of the burning building? You would run into the building, and even if it costs you your life, you would grab those children and get them out of that burning building. And I say it's an inadequate analogy because a burning building will only hurt you physically. It might even kill you, right? And we would be lying if we pretended like the system is not killing children. Suicide is literally the leading cause of death in certain age groups of children. This would have been unthinkable a generation ago. Children are killing each other. They're overdosing on drugs. So many of our children are being killed by this. Over 10% are being sexually assaulted and molested by the staff. So this is hurting your children physically. Their brains are being wired wrong. They're being castrated. Little girls are being given hysterectomies and double mastectomies. They're being given testosterone injections. So the physical damage and even the death is there. But this is drastically worse than that. Right? You can recover from physical damage. What we're talking about here is these children are being destroyed mentally, academically, morally, spiritually, in every conceivable way. And so I start from the premise of there really is no other option. You must get your children out of the burning building. But to your question, I actually know two people who are required to have their children in public school. So this is an issue that I have addressed. Both of them are under court order. Unfortunately, there was divorce, and as part of the divorce settlement, the parent who wanted government school won on that issue. And so the court ordered the child to go to government school. And what I say to these parents is, look, you have to understand that your child is being discipled into a theology, into an ideology, into a worldview that is completely antithetical to everything that the Bible teaches on every single issue. On every single issue. And so it sounds kind of ridiculous, but you need to tell your children, look, everything you're being taught is a lie. And you need to do everything possible to resist those lies, to call out those lies. You basically need, every day when your child gets home from school, debrief them, find out what they learned,
yeah.
right, and explain, this is why this is wrong, this is why this is wrong. And one piece of advice that I would give, and I don't think anybody should see this as like, well, maybe I can send my kids to government school and they'll be safe if I do this. But one thing that I would encourage parents to do who are in that situation, is a very small minority who are in that situation, is prepare your child in advance, equip your child in advance for what you know they're going to be confronted with. So evolution, my wife and I, we homeschool our 5 children, 6 is on the way. We homeschool, but we take the same approach. We know our children are going to be assaulted everywhere they go with the evolutionary worldview. And so from our perspective, our children need to know more about the theory of evolution than the people who believe in the theory of evolution. So equip your children, prepare your children, teach them the truth, and also teach them to laugh at some of these absurdities, right? When the teacher says, you might have been born in the wrong body, right? Maybe you're actually a girl trapped in a boy's body, and if you're castrated, then you're going to be your true self. Teach them that that's what they're going to encounter, and teach them to understand how utterly preposterous that is, so that when they hear it, they don't come home and say, Mommy, the teacher said maybe I was a girl in a boy's body. When they hear it, they laugh. They say, that's ridiculous. My mom and dad already taught me about that. I know that's foolishness. So it's very, very difficult. But if you're in that situation, do everything possible, like your child's life depends on it, because maybe it does.
Yeah, no, and I've seen that too, where, again, at the end of the day, Matthew 16, if you gain the whole world, but you lose your soul, then you have a profit of nothing. And as a parent, grandparent, I like what you said there, because in my 2 hours a week that I'd get as a pastor, I would teach them about evolution. We'd talk about evolution. We'd talk about, science, and we'd talk about the worldviews. We'd have worldview weekends. We'd go away, different things like that, because I'd say, hey, listen, this is what you're going to hear at school. How many heard this week? Oh, yeah, we heard that this week. I go, it's ridiculous, and here's why. And trying to help at least plant some seeds there, and that really is the goal. And so I think for those listening, You got to get Alex's book because he documents it. If you're unpersuaded, which I can't imagine any true Christian would be, but you document the whole thing. You give ways to see it, to expose it, and also solutions for it. So, well, we're going to take a little break here to see how to get our magazine, because that's one of the goals that we have in our magazine. Again, is to expose the wickedness and document the end of the age as we're seeing the world beast system come into play. And when we come back from break, we're going to talk about one of the ways that does that is through the economics and the central bank digital currencies that are coming, that are already here. And Alex is going to give us his insight on that. So stick around.
Greetings from the Prophecy Watchers podcast. I'm Karen, and I have a great suggestion that will put you on the path to be a Bible prophecy expert. Have you heard about our monthly magazine, The Prophecy Watcher? For a limited time, you can become a subscriber to either the print or the digital version of the magazine and receive 10 cutting-edge bonus DVDs. Just visit our website at prophecywatchers.com or click on the link in the description to see what God has planned for your future, straight from the pages of the Bible.
Welcome back, and I appreciate you guys being here. We're talking with Alex Newman from libertysentinel.org. Check it out. You have so much information there. It's so awesome, and keeping up to date. One of the things that we didn't mention in the first segment is that you go to these places. So you're in Davos. You lived in there. You're going to Saudi Arabia. You're going to COP27, COP24. So it's not like you are just reading it from your desk chair. You're going there and you're interviewing the people firsthand, and you're letting them speak. You're just like, tell me what's on the agenda. And they have no shame in any of this, right? They're proud of it.
They are proud of it. That's right. Yeah, it's really been incredibly fascinating. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to do that because, we've seen the handful of other journalists who actually were going there to do legitimate journalism have been banned. We suspect that at some point we won't be able to get into these places anymore. But as long as the door is open, we intend to continue going in there, shining the light, gathering the information, bringing it back for the American people, bringing it back for the church, because what's happening here is wickedness. It needs to be exposed. And, when I go in there as a journalist, I don't go in there necessarily as an evangelist. I mean, if somebody were to ask me, I'd be more than happy to give them all the truth that I could muster. But my purpose in going in there is to gather the information, basically to spy on the enemy, and then bring that information back to Americans so that, first of all, we will not be deceived by Satan, so that we will be able to effectively resist Satan, as the Bible calls on us to do. Resist him, and he will flee from us, is what the Bible teaches. And also so that Christians understand where this is all going. And what's so remarkable is how you go to these places, you see what these people are talking about, and it lines up perfectly with what the Scripture teaches, with what the Scripture tells us about what is coming down the pike here. So it's truly extraordinary to have these opportunities. I feel very blessed that God has allowed me to do this. And as long as He gives me breath, I intend to keep doing it. Yeah,
and one of those things that, that all of us are aware of, in Revelation 13, 16 through 18, we see this vision that John has of the end of the age, where in Revelation 13 itself, the beast system has a political component, has an economic component, and certainly has a religious component there. And specifically as it relates to economics, it brings up the idea of a mark, of a certain requirement that is put into place for buying and selling, and it's universal. Every tribe, tongue, every group, rich or poor. So, and because of that, going even all the way back to probably one of the greatest things was Hal Lindsey's book, The Late Great Planet Earth, and talking about this. And then, I wasn't raised a Christian, but in the early '90s, I got saved in '93, and seeing Cashless Society. I'm like, what? Cashless Society? What does that even mean? And so then I began to understand and look at this. And so when we think about a cashless society, are we there yet? What do you think? I mean, and then let's talk about central bank digital currency. Maybe define that first, and then we can, kind of discuss, are we there yet, and how long until we're there, and then what do we do when we get there?
Yeah, well, we're not there yet, but we're getting close. Actually, I was in Las Vegas just a few days ago for a conference, and we went to a restaurant for dinner, and they wouldn't take our cash. We said, well, we don't know what we're going to do then. We're just not going to have to walk out and not pay. So in the end, the manager came over, took our cash, paid with her credit card. But we are now seeing this all around the world. I saw it especially during COVID in airports. A lot of them wouldn't take my cash. And actually, the most recent country I lived in was Sweden, and Sweden is actually the most cashless society in the world. They haven't totally eliminated cash, but they're very, very close. They've got thousands of people walking around with microchips in their hand that they use to pay for their drinks at the bar. They use as their ID, they use as their wallet. When they get on the train, they pay their train fare. They scan their microchip. So we're moving very rapidly in this direction. And one of the things that's so fascinating to me is, when this was written, when John wrote down these visions, it must have seemed so utterly ridiculous that we would have a global system that would have some way of enforcing a total ban on buying or selling if you wouldn't take some mark. I mean, how could that even be? Imagine 2,000 years ago, before computers, before the internet, before microchips. It must have just sounded so utterly ridiculous.
Because of the barter system, right? I mean, you have the black markets, you have the barter systems, but now with the opportunity for documenting and tracking and programmability and all this, what was absurd back then,
it's becoming reality.
Very reasonable.
That's right. We're watching it being built in front of us. So the Bank for International Settlements, in addition to coordinating the move towards central bank digital currencies, they are building, and they're open about this. You can read about it on their website. You can see their speeches about it. They're building this international blockchain ledger, is what they call it, where every asset in the universe is going to become a digital token that's going to exist on this blockchain ledger. And to be able to interact with this blockchain ledger, you're going to have to use your biometric digital ID. You're going to have to pay with central bank digital currency, and all the contracts will be smart contracts. In other words, they'll be digital contracts. So we're watching this system being built in front of us that will enable a totalitarian one-world system to prevent virtually every purchase unless somebody is willing to participate. Now, I don't claim to know what exactly this mark will be, but we see the infrastructure laying down where that prophecy is becoming not just technologically feasible, we're watching it come to pass. Now, you combine that with some of the other things that you read about, for example, in Klaus Schwab's Fourth Industrial Revolution book. Klaus Schwab's the head of the World Economic Forum. He talks about the genetic manipulation, these new technologies like mRNA and CRISPR that will enable them to change the genetic code that God gave you. You talk about the mandates. And we saw this during COVID. You couldn't go into grocery stores in some countries unless you were willing to take this shot and walk around with your digital vaccine passport on your smartphone. So I don't know exactly what this is going to look like, but we see the technology, we see the push right now, and once the system is operational, I think it will be a very, very short leap to just say, all right, we're officially done with cash. Cash is for terrorists. Cash is for pimps. It's for drug traffickers. It's for tax cheats. We cannot have this anymore. Everybody's going to have to use this system, and if you don't want to participate, well, you'll deal with the consequences.
Yeah, you documented it very well in your presentation here just recently in Orlando, because how they quite clearly you had two videos in there from some leaders. I don't remember the names of them, but they were like, well, you mentioned tax cheats, and they phrase it, hey, you know what? This will be so wonderful because we will eliminate all these evil people. And at first glance, you're like, oh, yeah, we want to eliminate that, until they determined what is considered evil, as well as the programmability. Explain that aspect of it.
Yeah, so there's several things going on here with the programmability, and also with their ability to cut people off from the economy. In fact, there were several people who have publicly talked about how if your social credit score drops below a certain level, you can be prevented from buying certain things, et cetera. So the programmability aspect, and again, this is something they're talking about openly. I've got the deputy head of the International Monetary Fund on record talking about this. I've got the head of the Bank for International Settlements on record talking about this. They want to create these programmable currencies that will be able to determine who can buy what, when, and how. And I think a lot of it is, and they've said openly, it's going to be based on a variety of different data points, like how compliant are you? How subservient are you to this global system? If you're a good slave to the system, well, you'll get a good number of privileges, at least at the start. You'll be able to travel. You'll be able to emit more carbon dioxide, which is a central organizing principle of this. But they want to be able to completely control everybody. It's social engineering on an unprecedented scale. And again, they're saying this. This isn't Alex Newman saying this. This is Alex Newman going into their documents, listening to their speeches, and just reporting to you what they themselves are saying. They want to be able to determine if you can buy something, when you can buy it. They want to be able to impose negative interest rates. They want to be able to make certain things off limits to certain people. So this is a whole new world when it comes to currency. They want us to think of it as just like a new and improved form of cash. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah, and right now for those, the idea of programmability is already in existence. For years now, for people who are on food stamps, as an example, they get their little credit card, whatever, they get it, updated with a certain amount of money, and they go into the store, and then they can get bread and cereal, whatever. And then they go to try to buy cigarettes. And it says, oh, rejected, sorry. Yeah, you can't buy that.
That's right.
And so here again, this isn't anything unheard of. It's already in existence in certain ways. Recently, the Bank of International Settlements, I saw that they've been doing this 2-year pilot program. And then they announced just a few weeks ago that they will be it'll take 12 to 24 months to implement a full system where they incorporate all the currencies of the world in a very smooth functioning way, so that exchange rates have always been the challenges when you're dealing in certain things. But they said, we've done all the work, all the infrastructure's there, and we will be able to have them all commingling together smoothly. To kind of talk about that.
Yeah, and they are also moving very rapidly toward a one world currency. So, the first step in this process is to have interoperable systems. And you're right, the Bank for International Settlements, totally open about this. IMF, totally open about this. I first stumbled on the global currency angle over a decade ago. I ended up doing a cover story about it for the New American Magazine because they were saying openly that we were going to move toward a one world currency. World leaders, like the president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, Dmitry Medvedev, one of the leaders of Russia who took turns with Putin being prime minister and president, leaders from the IMF, The Economist magazine put on their cover in 1988, headed toward a world currency where they had the dollar kind of burning up, and out of the ashes, this phoenix, this one world currency rising up. And you had the head of the Chinese central bank put out a report saying, we believe we should move away from sovereign national debt-based currencies toward a single world currency. And they proposed that the International Monetary Fund's SDRs, the special drawing rights, should serve that purpose. So while they're working on phasing out cash and moving everything digital, they're also working out how to phase out national currencies. And there's some debate among the elitists whether we should move first toward regional currencies like the euro, or whether we just move directly into a one world currency. But I suspect what we're going to see here as time goes on is some sort of major economic and currency crisis that will lead almost inexorably either to first regional currencies, like a North American currency, an African currency modeled on the European currency, or just all into a one world currency. So we're seeing this global currency system, this global monetary system, this global economic system being born right before our eyes.
So, I don't, it's pretty rare that I carry cash with me. It's not convenient. That's just where I've ended up. Okay. And so, everything to me, I run everything through my credit card because I get points on it. I've gone into to that world. Okay. So, but let's say this. So in many ways, I'm already cashless. Okay. But there's a big difference between my level of cashlessness and what they're intending. But let's say that the United States, the Fed now, they have their payment systems, everything. Okay, let's say they come out with it, by January 1st of 2025. So let's fast forward a year. Here you are, you're sitting here with me, and we're like, man, are we in it or not? Is it a sin to be a part of that system?
Well, I think where the sin comes in is taking the mark of the beast.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't claim to know exactly what that's going to look like, although I suspect it'll be clear to believers when the time comes that this is it. We better
it's
not
connected with
participate.
worship, very clearly.
Absolutely.
So,
yep.
Yep.
But in the meantime, no, I don't believe it's. I use a credit card. It's it's easier to keep track of expenses for the IRS. Like you said, you get airline miles or whatever. They've made it very, very difficult
Alluring,
not to use.
exactly.
And a lot of businesses now are cashless. So I don't believe it's necessarily sinful to be cashless and to use these systems. But I think as Christians, we always need to have in the back of our mind, where is this going? Because I think at some point, all of us are going to have to draw a line and say, I'm not going any further. Whether that's Neuralink, I'm not going to have that contraption hooked into my brain. Whether it's a microchip, I'm not going to have that thing put under the skin in my hand. For me, it was a smartphone. I will never have a smartphone, God willing. I've resisted the temptation. I still use a flip phone. People think I came out of the 20th century, and I did. I understand that that's not where everybody's line is, and I would never regard as sinful somebody using a smartphone. It's not a judgmental issue. It's just for me, that's where my line is. And I think all Christians are eventually going to have to say, well, I'll go up to that, but after that, not 1 inch further. And I would encourage people to be in prayer about that. The Bible tells us, don't worry about what you're going to say when you're dragged before the governors. The Holy Spirit will help you. Yep, all that is true. But I think knowing where we are headed, it's a good idea for Christians to think about this, to pray about this, to be in the Word about this, and determine, that's the cutoff point. That's where I will not go past.
And on that, because for those, I encourage you to go to 50 in 5, 50in5.net, 50in5.net. It's amazing to go there because it's, the goal is 50 countries in 5 years, right? That are going to be working together to implement into their countries. There's already, last time, 11 to 15 different countries signed up. The goal is to create this open source software that will integrate the what they're calling, and this is the new phrase, the digital public infrastructure. So you got ID payments, you got or you got payments, you have identification, and then you have data exchange, and you have all those three, and they're trying to get it together so that when Jamaica or Zimbabwe or some of these other countries, they can just say, well, we want to do this, but we don't have the infrastructure. Well, that country's already done it. So go talk to them, and you can adopt their system. So it's connected. Well, you mentioned this in the presentation as well. How connected really is their goal to connect digital payments with ID and other data?
It's all one system, and that's very clear. The digital public infrastructure is the infrastructure to make this one world, one currency, total surveillance, total control system possible. And the 50 in 5 is a really, really good example of that. This is a UN program that's run by the UN Development Program, which is one of their agencies, and Bill Gates, the Bill Gates Foundation,
no surprise,
and a bunch of front groups at the Rockefellers and the Gates Fund. So when you take all of this together, now the World Health Organization has come in and said that the vaccine passports, the digital health certificates are going to be part of this digital public infrastructure. Bill Gates has said all the agriculture in the world is going to be pulled into this digital system. So we're talking here about a one world control grid that will help governments and the big companies of the world completely dominate the lives of everybody on Earth. And again, it's being built as we speak.
That's really the key, because back when the vaccines were required, I did a couple programs on, is the vaccine the mark of the beast? Clearly, no. I mean, our perspective of the mark of the beast appears in the middle of the tribulation period. We don't believe we're going to be here during that time, that we will be raptured prior. But nevertheless, it clearly is. In the tribulation system, it's connected with worship. I just went through the Bible and said, let's look every time the mark appears where it's connected with worship, and so we went through blah blah blah. But what we're seeing right now is the system being implemented. It's being built. It's being tried. You have these pilot programs, and we're not prophets here, but based on what you've seen, and I mean, you're in the nitty-gritty of it, what are you thinking as it relates to, will America be one of the last places where it comes? Because I know that, again, many places in China, it's already fully cashless with their apps and Alibaba and payment systems and blah, 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 But what kind of time frame do you think that we have here?
It's very interesting that some of the countries that you would have thought would be last are actually some of the first. Jamaica is a good example,
Yeah.
right? And the Bahamas, just 100 miles from where I live off the coast. Bahamas was actually the first country to implement a central bank digital currency. They call it the sand dollar. And this is amazing. I mean, anybody who's been to the Bahamas knows it's pretty poor. They don't exactly have the ubiquitous technology like we do here in the United States. And so you see a lot of African governments are being pressured and bribed by the Bill Gates of the world, the Rockefellers of the world, to bring it in. So I suspect this is coming very, very rapidly. I suspect they're going to have to use a series of crises to get people to adopt it. I do think that America will probably be one of the toughest nuts to crack because we have, of course, a lot of Bible-believing Christians here. We have a long tradition of opposition to overbearing government control. And so I think America is going to be a difficult one for them to
we
bring
have Florida.
on board. That's right. Florida banned central bank digital currencies, right?
And so that I think what you said is so good there because, the United States is not monolithic, and so it'll be interesting. And ultimately, the courts will decide a lot of this as it relates to these states. We have here several states that are saying, hey, you know what? Constitutionally, we have the ability to resist certain federal regulations because it's limited to the states, right? According to constitutional, if it's not specifically denoted in there, it's given over to the states.
Yeah.
So you have some states that are saying, again, just banning this. Will they become their own? Will they declare independence? I don't know.
But even Texas, they've got a gold bullion depository set up now by the state, and I've spoken with the legislators who are pushing this. They told me it's going to pass next year. They're working on a system whereby you could go deposit your gold at this depository. You'll be issued a debit card, and then you can go into any shop and pay with your debit card. They'll just deduct a little bit of gold from your account. The merchant will get paid in Federal Reserve notes, dollars, whatever he wants. And so there are real efforts to actively build alternative payment systems to compete with this monolithic system that the Federal Reserve and the federal government are building. So, I think America is going to be a challenge for them. We'll see what happens.
And so, so as we wrap this up here, you're dealing with somebody who's, let's say, maybe a skeptic, and how does what you are witnessing and what we're all witnessing, but what you're in it because you're writing about it and constantly, and you're going to these places. How does it give credence or credibility to the reliability of Scripture, the direction that we're heading, and ultimately to the gospel?
Yeah, for me, this is a really, really critical issue because it's one of the things that the Holy Spirit used to get a hold of me and bring me to the realization that the Bible was actually true, to bring me to faith. And so I encourage people to look at what's happening in the world and compare it with what the prophecies that God has revealed to us in Scripture teach, whether that be Daniel, whether that be the book of Revelation. It's clearly talking about a move toward a satanic, totalitarian, one-world system. And again, thousands of years ago when these things were written, that probably sounded very bizarre. A lot of the world wasn't even known then. They didn't realize there was pygmies in Central Africa, Indians in the Amazon rainforest. So we're now watching those prophecies being fulfilled. And so I would encourage skeptics to just look at what's happening in the world, compare it with what the Bible teaches, and frankly, I don't see how any reasonable person could look at those two, could compare those two, and come to any other conclusion unless he or she was radically deceived, unless he or she was one of these people that we read about in Romans 1 that just deliberately suppressed the truth in their unrighteousness. So.
Yeah, stubbornness, and that's not what we want for anybody. And so, well, we appreciate you guys listening today. It's great, Alex. It's been great just doing several interviews with you. And again, these are absolutely important topics, and we want to remind you to join us in Colorado and Branson. And Alex will certainly be there in Colorado, giving us the latest information as we're watching the beast system being put in place, which again is exciting to me, not in the sense of that, but behind it is the return of Jesus.
Amen.
To make the world right and to rule the world in righteousness, which is what we want. So everybody, thanks for listening today, and we will catch you next time.